All right. Good afternoon, everyone. And I think good morning and good evening as well to people zooming in from different parts of the world. Um, I'm Maisnam Arnapal, for those of you who don't know me. And I welcome Roderick Wijunamai, our guest speaker of the day on behalf of ARCLA. Before I introduce our speaker, let me share a few words about ARCLA. That stands for Advanced Research Consortium, Library and Archives. This was established in 2005 and became a public library in 2020. And since 2020, we have nearly 500 members enrolled. This year only, we have above 90 people enrolled in this library. And its member pays a nominal fee of just 99 rupees per year, and they get access to reading space, and they can also borrow a maximum of three books at a time. This library and archives is home to rare manuscripts, particularly pertinent to Manipur as well as 16th century, and also a lot of other books and collections, right, across genres and disciplines. Uh, Now, with great delight, I introduce today's guest speaker, Roderick Wijunamai, who I happen to know for a really long time. First, as somebody whose books I followed diligently for years. Roderick Wijunamai is a PhD candidate in the Department of Anthropology, Cornell University. He studies economic formations, ecological transformations, and indigenous livelihood strategies in the highlands of Indo-Myanmar borders rather. He's also a visiting research fellow at the Highland Institute, Kohima in Nagaland. He holds a degree in English literature from Manipur University and an MA in development studies from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Prior to commencing his PhD, Roderick was a lecturer in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the Royal Thimphu College in Bhutan. Roderick is one of the most prolific scholars that I know, contemporary scholars. He has published a range of works in academic journals and also critical companions. He's also a public-facing scholar who writes regular critical commentaries and provides mentorship to young scholars. Roderick, now the floor is all yours.
Um, Thank you, Maisnam, for that very generous introduction, but which also made me quite nervous and quite gives me a lot of pressure to live up to that. But thanks also to ARCLA Manipur. It's so nice to know about the work that you're doing. And it's also really a delight and an honor for me to be able to come and speak to you and interact with you about my recently published essay in Sociological Bulletin. So, Mason, can you please share the screen? This is going to be a little different in ways that two people are going to coordinate and gesture each other about, the logistics of how this talk would go. So yeah, the title of the talk is just the same as the title of the essay. And if you go next, so just starting with what is my motivation behind this and how did I start? So this is one of my earliest work. So I sort of just to briefly give you a journey about how I conceived this or how I conceptualize this. So as someone who has lived in the borderlands, as someone who grew up in the borderlands, or sometimes also, interchangeably called the frontier spaces. So you grew up learning a lot and listening a lot about, borderlands, or more specifically, in the case of Asia and South Asia in particular, historians like William Bensonville has been very instrumental in this kind of sort of, academic interest in borderland thinking. And then it was around that time when, I was starting to have conversations about, what are the kind of things that happens here, or like what does borders do to people, or what do borders, for example, communities living in border, how do they come to think of themselves? So as I was thinking about this, and I read Willem, and I read a few of this ABRN group of scholars, I came to realize that much of the literature in borderland studies is about international boundaries and not national boundaries. So William's book, for instance, is about India-Bengal border, or the more recently published book by Sahana Ghosh is also about India-Bangladesh border. And many of our, existing scholars or, previous scholars their work centers around international boundaries, be it Bhutan, be it Nepal, be it Bengal, or even Burma, for instance, or Myanmar, so to speak. So I started to think about, is there nothing that is, is there nothing that was kind of inherently generative about national boundaries and not necessarily just international boundaries? So if you go to the next slide, then it occurred to me that the community that I'm a part of is, very much, a trans-border community. So I belong to the Lingmei Naga community. So the Nagas, broadly speaking, are, live across India and Myanmar. And within India, they're spread across, many states, 4 states for that matter. And so when I start thinking about this, there were also other kind of literature that I came across, and the most prominent being Peter Salins, who talks about how France and Spain boundaries sort of led to kind of ethnic divide in the same, so to speak, ethnic groups. And so that it also kind of dawned on me that there is something about these political boundaries and ethnic boundaries that do not overlap. And borderland scholars have often said that political boundaries are much younger, and ethnic boundaries, so to speak, have always been there, or sort of, have always kind of like had this rigid formation. And so when international boundaries come, when national boundaries come, it divides ethnic boundaries. But that made me think about, from trying to think about what borders do the community, to whether ethnic groups really have no boundaries. So does that mean ethnic groups have been there since time immemorial, like as often scholars would say? Does that mean, whether, tribes have always existed, and there was never, there was never a fluidic change, or there was, in some sense, like, tribes as a static entity existed. So that got me interested in about, like, rather than actually when my interest peaked, it sort of moved away from what borders do the communities to what are the borders within communities or ethnic groups, or is there border at all, or is there kind of like, new borders that's created within ethnic groups, so these were the questions that sort of dawned on me. So if you go to the next slide, and I'm trying to recall what is the next slide. So yeah, so this is one of the signboards that I came across. It says, border roads not only connect places, we connect families, simply to imply that, border roads, meaning not just international borders, but, these borderland roads have, have communities that are across boundaries and across. So we have this kind of recurrent kind of, nostalgia about how borders have separated the ethnic groups. But we don't seem to think so much about how ethnic groups within, or, how ethnic groups, so to speak, which we have always thought were so much older than political borders, also at one point of time were created borders. They came into existence by creating a border within an existing community, or sometimes they come together, coalesce together, and that is what I'm getting at. Next slide, please. So, so I started to think about then, what is it that I want to know? What is it that what I'm trying to understand? And so I, as an ethnographic experiment, as not something like, so this essay is not something that I did for my PhD. My PhD work is on oil palm, and I'm researching the uptake of oil palm in India's northeast. And I'm broadly interested, as Maisnam said, about livelihoods, about how livelihoods and environmental changes are related to each other, and how that leads to new kind of economic formation, etc. But this essay in particular is particularly dear to me because I started to think about, or I wanted to play with the idea about, yes, okay, then if ethnic boundaries also sort of are created and newly created afresh, so how do people talk about, their entities as something, that used to be a cohesive past, in the sense like, if new entities, new ethnic boundaries come into play, or new ethnic boundaries are blurred, and then all sort of all oneness or all kinships are reflared, then I just wanted to understand, so what are these stories? What are the stories of fermenting kinship What are the stories of shared, fraternity and all of this? How do these stories surface? But more importantly, how do these, so to speak, past old stories about origin stories or about migration stories, how are they told, or so to speak, retold in the present? Are they told the same way, or are they told in a different way with different kind of intonation? And also, how do these people make sense of these stories in relation to their ethnic identity? This particularly is kind of like awkward to me because, as someone who grew up in Manipur, I would often go to the district magistrate's office, or what we call district commissioner's office, the DC office, to take my tribe certificate. And when I was a kid, I would write Kachanaga. And so it doesn't. So when the first time I went to take a tribal certificate, and that was, I think, towards the later part of my high school, I went myself. And when I was writing, I said tribe, then I wrote Liangmei, because I was taught that I'm Liangmei and I grew up as Liangmei. But then my friend told me that you should write Kachanaga. And I was like, why? Aren't we Liangmei? I said, oh no, we have to write this. I didn't think of it. It just confused me and I left it here. But down the line, I started to write, after my graduation, and, after the recognition of Liangmei as a tribe in 2013, I started to write my tribe name when I go to SDC's office as Liangmei. There was something that felt so good about it. But then this came back to me when I started thinking about these boundaries in both, borderland spaces, but also ethnic boundaries. Now, when I think about this, I also started to think about then, like, how do I make sense of these old stories that we were called Kachanagas before? Or where did this Kachanaga started, or like who used this term to start with? Why was this term used? And why is it that sometimes I hear about we are Zillingrong, or like, as Zillingrong people, but sometimes when I go back to my village, we never use the word Zillingrong, and we use words like Liangmei, or we use words like Liang Chimai as someone from my village. So I wanted to understand then, like, how do people make sense of these old stories, the stories of what we call the Zillingrong history, Liangmei history, and also how do this kind of ongoing changing situation and context predicament led to such ways of telling, and that led to such kind of, emphasis. So if you go to the next slide. So then how I did this was really by traveling across. So the Zillingrong people, if you go to the next slide, you will know that they are in three different states in Northeast India, and they are Assam, Manipur, and Nagaland. And so I decided to go to each of these places. I've visited all of them before. And so I wanted to understand, like, how do this group of people, so-called the Zillingrong, which is a term used as an acronym of the first few lines, the Zemei, so Z-E, Liangmei, so Liang, and then Rongmei as R-O-N-G. And if some of you have read my essay, then you would know that for the longest time, the Zillingrong was just Zillingrong, and then suddenly there was a resurgence of, like, what about this fourth tribe called the Inpui? So the whole time, even as I grew up, for the half part of my life, I was made to believe that there were three tribes, Zemei, Liangmei, and Rongmei. Later part of my life, I came to realize that there is a group that is trying to assert their identity, that's trying to assert their, that's trying to assert sort of their, find a space within Zillingrong and say, and even contending that, the Zillingrong does not represent us because our Zillingrong has the first few syllables of the Zemei, Liangmei, and Rongmei, but not the Inpui. And so in a more recent iteration, this has come to be called Zillingrong Pui, or Zillingrong Inpui, or all of that. And so I traveled to three different states. If some of you are not familiar with what we call ethnographic fieldwork is where, especially anthropologists and increasingly sociologists, but also increasing the other disciplines, including history, political science, but also geography, has come to use. And in simple words, ethnography simply is a study of people by going and living with them for a sustained number of days and months, or sometimes even over a year or two. And through that, like by living in the place, by interacting with the place, by doing things together with them, they come to learn of things that they're interested in just by being there. So what I did was not really an ethnography per se. I would what is called, I would term it as ad hoc ethnography. Ad hoc ethnography simply means like a very purposive. Sorry? Oh, yeah. So can you please go to the next slides? So I traveled across, so the Zelengrong group of people, they trace the ancestral origin to a place called Makuilongdi, which is in Manipur. And before that, along with many other tribes, they sort of gathered at a place called Makhil. And that is where the trails of migration, the stories of origin start. So it is told in in our oral history telling that Zelengrong people consist of a group who are three brothers, the oldest brother being Liangmei, middle one being Zemei, and the youngest one being Rongmei. And so all of them, they moved from Mekhel and came to Makuilongdi, and from there, when population became too big, they moved. So some of them moved south, some of them moved west, and the oldest one, which is Liangmei, stayed back. Until today, Makuilongdi is a village of the Liangmei. But in all of this telling of stories, what I came to realize, well, as a kid growing up, I thought it was three brothers, but later on I came to realize that there were four brothers and there were four tribes. But still, I was unable to get a good story about why there were four brothers or why there were four tribes. But then now, or why is it that we don't hear about it, or why is it that now it's suddenly showing up? So I traveled across. And I only sort of cherry picked certain places which I thought could, have access to, have friends. And so ethnography also, in some ways, the popular criticism is that you have no clear-cut, as a sampling method, scientific way of meeting and talking to people. So that's one of the biggest criticisms. So because most of the quantitative research centers around both random sampling, non-random sampling, and in non-random sampling, there are multiple types of sampling, and then you have very reasoned and you try to contain all of these possible skewness or possible kind of biases. But with ethnography, it's slightly different in that you factor in your access, who you can talk to. Sometimes when people are unable to talk to people, we take it as a no. And that itself, we try to understand why people refuse to talk to you, or why is it that you're unable to gain entry. But more importantly, or most importantly, ethnography or ethnographic project sort of, and increasingly so, is very aware of our positions. And when people say no, we take it for a no, and we don't push for it. And also, much more than that, what ethnography or ad hoc ethnography, which I followed, also teaches you is that there can be so much of what sometimes scholars would dismiss as what very ordinary. So the ethnographer is confronted with this idea of how do you make sense of this ordinariness, or something that is people are unable to give you long explanation about some things, or people are unable to exhaustively give you, or sometimes people are just inconsistent. They say we do this, but actually they do that. So ethnographers in that way try to make sense of what people say, but also try to pay attention to what people do. So in ad hoc ethnography, in which I sort of used in trying to research for this essay, and some of the essays that are in draft formation right now, is that I was not really able to go beyond what people told me. So that would be the biggest drawback of what I have here. So if you go to the next slide, so this is how Zelengrong identity formation evolved. And if some of you have read my essay, so the earliest kind of Zelengrong, what is a Zelengrong, who is a Zelengrong, that kind of formation started with a person called Haipo Zadonang, who was trying to attend to the multiple kind of colonial incursions that was happening, both religious level, but also this kind of forced labor. And the forced labor, to be sure, did not start with the British. It already was existing with the Métis kings who was already trying to, have this forced labor that was imposed on villagers adjacent to the Manipur kingdom. And, earlier incursions of, I think, just before British or probably later too, was, one particular king of the Meiteis was so fascinated by Hindu and then imbibed everything and was trying to put the same kind of, hegemony in the villages in the Naga Hills. And so there were multiple factors that were happening. But cut short, if you're interested, I've given some reference in my essay. This was the time when, such things, such formation happened and started. But Zandang was really not able to make good inroads with one of the groups, which is the ZMA people. At least that is what the archives say. And also to say that it is not just my field work based on what people told me in the field, but also me reading at some of the communications that happen across in what is called state archives or some of the existing kind of documents that are there in informal settings. So, but Rani Gaidinyu took this forward. Some say Rani Gaidinyu is the cousin. Others say Rani Gaidinyu and Zadonang are not related. And some also speculate that Gaidinlu must have actually been the niece and not the cousin. And so there is that kind of, but broadly, it's kind of understood that, well, it could be a cousin or a niece. And so Rani Gaidinlu took it forward, and then there was this kind of strong kind of identity, consciousness movement that was happening, trying to bring together the Zeliang people, the Zemei, Liangmei, Rongmei, and including Impui, about how we are one people and we are, being colonized. Our religion is under threat, and also, this kind of forced labor, which later turned into forced taxation. All of this were some of the issues that they started to raise awareness. And so as a group, it first came together as Kabui Tingsam, which later got renamed as Kabui Samiti. And eventually, in 1947, they came together. All of them, they said, okay, we're going to be a group of people. We are going to reunite our historical rootedness, and we're going to call ourselves Zelengrong. And so the Zelengrong was coined in 1947, and it became Zelengrong Council. The next slide, please. And then what happened then was that this is Rani Gaidinlu and Zadonang. And next. What happened later then was that, they started intensifying. So first it was against an anti-colonial rebellion and all of this kind of external intrusion. And there were also other factors which, neighboring communities were trying to come and, so to speak, from the Zelengro perspective, encroaching in their lands. And they thought that, okay, we have to come together because, there's colonization, there's a move to, to change our religion, and only some have converted. And there is also this kind of, our lands that has been intruded on or encroached on by neighboring tribes. And so this move went on to sort of seek homeland in a post-colonial context. After the British departure, what happened was in the 1980, Zelengong People's Convention was formed, and they said, okay, Nagaland state in 1963 was created after India's independence, as a compromise state between Nagas trying to come together. But when Nagaland state was formed, a lot of the Zeliang people were outside Nagaland, and they said, okay, our people is going to be divided by both this, borders that were created in Nagaland's newly created Nagaland state, but also we're going to be very fragmented, and so we want to come together. And so that was the biggest push that happened in 1980s and intensified in 1990s. But fast forward, and then what happened was when I started trying to understand how identities have changed and how growing up you hear about Zelengrong, but also you have all of this assertiveness about Liangmei. And in one of my interviews, somebody said that, our knot, which is the Zemei, Liangmei people and the Rongmei people coming together, are getting loose. The bounds that tie the three brothers, and even here, the retired leader still does not use four brothers, have now been concerned, all of them are concerned about their own tribes. And now because of that, especially after the government of India recognized all these tribes as a separate tribe, even the NNCN-IM at that point of time, the insurgent group that was at the forefront of the Naga movement, had issued a directive saying all of you will be recognized as a separate tribe. And then if there is any consultation, we will not have one person for Zeliangrong, but all of you will get tribal representation. So all of this together, sort of comes as something like, what is this identity that supposedly were one people, but now present themselves as different? And if you go to the next slide, what we see is that in the telling of the stories, when I go and look at all articles, all speeches, and all times that when elders would often hear about, is that we are one. We are Zeliangrong people. We're all from Makuilongdi. We came from Makel, but we settled in Makuilongdi. We are a group of people who are who are the golden torch bearers of this very beautiful place called Makuilongdi, which is separated ways because of the population, etc. But from there, from being same, now they say, we're not the same people, we're just similar, and we have a lot of differences. And so you have, in the telling of the stories, I started to hear a lot about, like, with the same story, you say that this story tells that we are similar, we have similar trajectories, we come from a similar roots, but at the end, we're not the same tribe, we're different tribes. And at the end, some people also admittedly say, yes, we come from one place, but what we see now is that, one group where, the biggest group in certain states have more political stakes and they try to sort of dominate other people. And that's not a nice thing. So the experience of being together is not very pleasant. So we better part ways. But also there were some people who were telling me that, oh, if you're a separate tribe, then you get separate recognition in church councils, in the Naga movement, and all of that. So there were multiple reasons why people were trying to start asserting this kind of difference. So at one point of time, when they came together, when Zaranang movement or Ranigadini movement, or even the peak of it, what came together was that they had a shared purpose. They had a shared thread. But now, with this kind of vanishing kind of thread, with this kind of changing political climate, they found it more instrumental to divide. Or even if they were to stay together, they thought that they should have a different place and speak for their own. But in this, what came across is very interesting to me is the reversal of role of religion. The earliest movement that started during the Zaranang movement, or at least the consciousness that started, religion played a very important role in bringing together and say Christianity was the one that's colonizing us. Hinduism is coming in parallel and then trying to change our people. And so we have to rise up to it. This is, a foreign religion. But now the same religion became a driving force for differentiation and for change in, direction. So when I interviewed and when I started to try to understand most of the split before Liangmais were even recognized as a separate Liangmai tribe, this churches started to be bifurcated. And from Zeliangrong Baptist Council, it became Liangmai Baptist Council, Rongmai Baptist Council. And so even if there was no formal kind of recognition, that divide already happened. And the prime factor and the prime mover here was religion. But in there, even if the prime factor was religion, they really instrumentalized language. They say, look, Zeliangrong does not have a language on its own. How can we speak or sing in Manipuri when we are Zeliangrong people? We have our own identity. It's just outrageous to speak in another person's language. And so they say, and even when we communicate, in Nagaland, in Nagamese, or in Manipur, in Meiteilon. And so we have to just, we have to just depart and we have to sing in our own tribes, tribal languages. And so that language played a huge role in this kind of a splintering of what was called a common identity. If you go to the next slide, I'm finishing, I'm wrapping up. And yet, even if they stayed apart, if they became fragmented, what was that? They continued. And even now, there is all this kind of Makuilongdi celebration, or this kind of like Zeliangrong as one people, all of this coming together. And yet you also have regrouping in certain different kind of forms. Like in Nagaland, there is, a group called the Tenemi People Forum. And so all of this Liangmais and Rongmais and Zemais, but also with other tribes, including tribes in Manipur, Pomai, Mao, Maram, Tangal, and here the Angamis, Pachuri, all of this we are known together as Tenemi people. And meanwhile, some people are saying we are actually the Hamite people. So Tenemi is big, but then within Tenemi, we're Hamite people, God's people. So people are saying. So then it occurred to me that what is this idea of calling ourselves Lingmei or Zeme or Rongmei or as a bigger entity is Zelingrong or a bigger entity is Tenemi? It becomes then this are an ethnic formation that becomes more of an event rather than a group. So it's not that Tenemia as a group that exists, but Tenemia as a people come together as an event. Zelingrong does not exist as a group. It is not out there, but they are brought together as an event. And so you have this regrouping. And so today I'm sitting here speaking to you as a Liangmei Naga, for instance, but tomorrow there's a Zelingrong meet and we'll all go there and we suddenly call ourselves Zelingrong. Day after tomorrow, the Tenemia Church's Council or the Tenemia Church wants to celebrate Christmas together and will happily come together across tribes. I'll go speak to my kin tribe Angamis or the Chakasang and say, we Tenemi people. And so this owning up or this performance or this grouping is what has what Brubaker's calls it an event rather than a group that's existing and always there. And so what I see is that this actually is similar in many tribes across India, in India's northeast, where groups, for example, if you see even in the Tangku community, you have this within certain groups, certain villages, Tangku speaking another language, but they're all considered Tangku. But there are also tribes that speak the same language, but are different tribes. And so there is no clear demarcation about what makes a tribe. And so then how you project and articulate your identity becomes an event. And so my point being, down the line, if there are more, and I foresee more breakages of tribes from, some tribes become as conglomeration of many language speaking groups, tomorrow if they become, different tribes, we should not be surprised because this coming together is an event. And so the splintering of it also becomes like a cycle through which this becomes, an ongoing fluidity and fissures and fusion. And so, can you go to the last slide? And so when we think about this, well, I would like, I'm really closing here. I'm not supposed to speak this long, but in speaking about this, what we often see is the scholarship on the region often says that be it scholarship that's coming out from Darjeeling, and Darjeeling has one of the highest number of study of how tribes are scheduled or how people perform their tribes. Lopsided attention is given to the state and say everyone, all of these performances are for the state. But if you look at what the case that I presented now, in certain places like in certain other places, you have no incentive to come together as Tenemi people vis-a-vis the state. You have no incentive of being, splintered as a smaller tribe in a place like, Assam, for instance, or Manipur, for instance, as, because even when you get state provisions, there's a broad ST demarcation. But, there is so less about why you would be so invested in trying to create a space as a Liangmai identity or as an Inpui identity. So what I would suggest here, and to be a bit mindful here, is that yes, of course, state is an important factor in trying to assert and trying to project and articulate a group's image, but also there are other host of factors that are, that are sort of, so to speak, kept in mind or considerations when trying to come together as a group. So if ethnic formation is an event, grouping or event formation or the event that happens is always not because of the state, and we also have to move. And I encourage, if anybody is interested in researching this further, to look at this many ways in which such group formation and unformation is also not, or is beyond state premise and beyond the statist rationals. And I think I would end it here. And I would like to hear your thoughts if you had the time to look at my essay, or also, if my talk today made any sense. Thank you all for listening.
Wow. Thank you so much, Roderick. This was awesome. I mean, some of us have definitely read the essay, so your presentation adds more layers and clarity to the essay. But yeah, I would like to listen from hear from our audience first. If any audience have any comment, any feedback, any questions you have to the presentation or the essay. You can unmute, or you can also use a chat box. Those of you who are not comfortable talking, you can also use a chat box and type the questions and comments. Also, why don't I start with my comment first? And Roderick, when your essay came out, I was very happy because uh, there are identity politics everywhere in this region and in different parts of the world. And because of this deeply entrenched identity politics, there are a lot of conflicts, right, in small scale, large scale, whatever. And I think it's very important that we revisit the questions of identities and, like you ended, the formation and unformation of identity groups, which are not always vis-a-vis the state, but sometimes I think you use the word affects in your essay, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, yeah,
Sometimes affects, right, the affective, whatever, solidarity or affective togetherness, right, which is not always against the state or in relation to the state, which I found it very interesting. It could be just sharing a meal. Uh yeah, so the way how you deconstructed the idea, the monolithic idea of a tribe or any kind of identity groups. Also, you move from identification to negative identification, right? First, it was about sameness, and then later on, it was less of sameness, more about similarities and differences, and so on and so forth, uh, triggered by different political and exigencies of the time. Um, I like the word you use, events and not groups, like events as in something which is dynamic, which happens and are constantly happening. The features and fusions, right? Uh, yeah. Mm, One thing that this is something that I'm bringing out from my own perspective, from my own study. One, indigenous studies, and two, queer theory. Two of the critiques from, I think, biggest contributions of indigenous studies and queer theory, or queer studies about identity politics is um, mm, indigenous studies has strongly challenged the idea of what we call politics of recognition, right? Yeah, we are always relying on the state or the liberal form framework, for certain kind of recognition, for the state to recognize us, to give us, let's say, SC status or ST status, whatever. Also, I mean, a lot of people will say we need that for practical reasons, but at the same time, over reliance on the liberal framework, it doesn't, benefit the indigenous people or any minority groups in the long term. That's one thing. The critique of politics of recognition. I think this is the same critique also comes from queer theory, queer movement, where they have also challenged the politics of recognition, right? I mean, the state giving you marriage equality right does not necessarily improve the condition of the community, right? It's like a handful of lucky people, like really privileged people, will get married, but that doesn't solve like sex or gender-based discrimination. And also the politics of respectability, like a handful of us getting into this respectable positions, like getting a job or bureaucrat, doesn't really solve racism or whatever. So identity politics are like deeply, are very multi-layered and very complex, and um, so we have to understand them, right, in its nuances, and not the over reliance on the state. And I think the way you ended with not always vis-a-vis the state, but also based on affects and other kinds of affinities and associations. And I think I told you before that I love the how you concluded your essay, the last part of the essay, the events over groups and affects over political mobilization. I have questions, but I'll come back later. But I would like to give the floor to other people who have questions and comments or any. Yeah,
The Arnapal, can I come in?
sure, sure.
Yeah. Roderick, hi. This
Hi.
is Malim. I'm not sure if you remember me.
I do. If you switch on your video,
You can show your video,
too.
Malan. You can show your video. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Let me just.
Hello,
Yeah.
hello. I see you.
Okay. All right. So I have 3 specific questions. Very specific questions. I mean, we are not very familiar with the whole methodology of ethnography and anthropology, even though we have some vague idea what the discipline is about. So I'm just throwing you these questions out of sheer ignorance, all right? So I'm not sure if these are appropriate in a function like this, but yeah, let me just come to it. The first one is you talked about the first 3 communities, that is Liangmai, Zeme, and Rongmai. And you also talked about a 4th one, which is Inpui, but the nomenclature itself has the first syllable for the 3 communities only, right? You told us a little bit about the history, the origin of these communities, how they were all brothers, and I find that
I think she's stuck.
Malangabi, your screen is frozen. If you could, yeah, if Malangabi, hello. You can also type the questions in the chat box. If I think she's okay, yeah.
Oh, she's back.
You're talking about the brotherhood origin story. Yeah, carry on.
Okay. Liang Mei is the eldest brother, right?
Yes, yeah.
But the nomenclature goes that the series of the nomenclature goes like Zeliang Rong. It starts with Zeme. So I was wondering if there was any conscious decision-making process while choosing the nomenclature Zeliang Rong. That is my first.
Our screen is frozen.
Again?
I think you could switch off your video. Maybe that might work.
That might work. Yeah, Malangabi, if you can switch off your video. That will speed up. Yeah.
Yeah, I've switched on my video. Now, am I audible clearly?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. And the second one is you talked about the language problem, where you say that in Nagaland. So I want to know if this language problem has been solved, and if it has been solved, how was it solved? And the third, the name Liangmei and Naga together, it goes like Liangmei Naga, right? So Liangmei is the prefix and Naga is the suffix. I was wondering if there's any reason behind the series of how we prefix and suffix these 2 identities together. Because if you come to Manipur, we find that when we attach Tangkul, Kabui, or Tado, we usually say Manipuri Tangkul or Manipuri Tado, right? So if there's any political, any reason behind how we negotiate with this prefix and suffixes. Yeah, so these are my 3 questions. That's all.
Wow, I should start a new PhD right now.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you, Maisnam, for those very generous comments and also very.
By the way, I forgot to tell you. I mean, it was a really crisp and precise presentation. I mean, it's very clear, and you didn't deviate to any of the unnecessary all this other stuff. So, and then it was I thought it would go on a little bit longer, but it was really interesting because we could focus really on what was the important.
Thank you so much. The problem with me going on is I would miss out on hearing this fantastic questions and really generative discussions like this, and it is very rarely in conferences or in talks like you give a presentation and they're like, oh yeah, and they ask very shallow questions. And these are, I mean, in just 2 comments, I'm just overwhelmed, and I'm just very, very grateful for this space. And so thanks again, Maisnam, and thanks Malem for these great questions. As I said, I may not be able to answer all of this, but this definitely rest assured that you have really made me think, and you have really pushed me to, like, to generatively move forward with what I have right now. So even if I'm not able to respond to you in ways that you don't like appreciate, know that I'm trying to like think about this, and I will be thinking about these questions. So just very broadly about
it is completely fine. I just wanted to hear what you have to say.
Correct. Yeah. So I'll try. So, but I just wanted to be very clear that I'm very thankful to both of you for these questions and comments. So with the question of history and origin, I've never, until the time that you just told me now, I've never thought about why Liang should not be first and Zhe should be first, despite being that Liang Wei is the oldest brother. Other than the fact that, I always wonder why In Pui's name is not there. But my kind of like a very preliminary assessment and sort of like, a preliminary kind of response to that would be, as I say there, and also Monlumo Kikon's new book, His Majesty's Headhunter, talks about names and naming places and people. And so, there are various series of theories about how Angami got its name, about how Liangwei's got its name. And so one of the theories is that Kachanaga came from Kechanaga, which means deep jungle people or deep forest people, who like, when somebody asks them who are these people, they say, oh, they live deep in the forest. So like Kecha, like, from there, the British fantastic way of, mispronouncing and going from there. So it became, but over time, if you see colonial literature, like they move from being called Kachanaga to Zeliang. So till today in Nagaland, they are called Zeliang and they're not called Zelingrong. And I have a separate essay for this, and I consciously did not bring this up about how there is also a divide between Manipur and Nagaland Nagas. And using the case of Zelingrong, it is very instructive about how these borders sort of like come in the way of even this identity formation. So it's not that only this boundaries. There's a crisscross of geographies in implicated in identity formation. So I think that Zeliang that was already like in popular parlance around here sort of contributed to the way in which the naming kind of put there. So my hunch is that it is this kind of like ease of things rather than like thinking about the sequence of who's the oldest, so the oldest would come. But I would surely go and like try to find out more about this. And quickly to your second, so in Manipur, and this, I mentioned this in a passing in my note also, that the Zeliang politics is lopsidedly focused in Manipur. And I think that not just because Nagas are a significant minority, but I think Zeliang people also have this very complicated tree representation in Manipur, as against, for instance, Assam or Nagaland. And so I think that when even all these fissures and fusion happened, Manipur was at the forefront of how this kind of politics were unfolding. And so this regrouping or like church formation and church splintering of groups happened in Nagaland later, and much after the split of church associations in Manipur happened, it happened in Nagaland. And that was the same thing. And here in Nagaland, the Liangwais were the first to split. And then it's interesting because some Rongmeis were already in the Liangmei and Zemei inhabited area, and some of them were using tribal certificates of Zeliang without even using Rongmei. So in Nagaland, only Zeliang was recognized. So here the Rongmeis would get their tribe certificates by saying that they're Ziliang, although they continue to be, they know that they're Rome, they continue to speak in Rome. So the language problem, as is said, or like how it kind of comes in the way of all of this, it's at a church level, it kind of solves this, wanting to speak and write or read in your own, although we don't have a script. We use Latin script. So yes, in Liangmei churches, we speak Liangmei and we read Liangmei Bible and we sing in Liangmei hymnals now. And so that, yes, is resolved. But in Nagaland, that came much later. And in some churches, in other tribes, you still have this about certain tribes using another tribe's language, hymnals, and Bible, and which my prediction is that the same thing that happened in Zherengrong could also come that side. Finally, about why Liangmei Naga or not Manipuri Naga or Manipuri Takut, I think that so there is this kind of like, I think my kind of like nudge to this and a little maybe unpopular opinion perhaps would be, I think we have to consider or think about like what is a Manipuri and what does it connote? Does it only reflect a Manipuri as someone who lives in Manipur? Or for example, if I go and live in Bihar, do I become Bihari Liangmei? Or is Bihari a reference of an ethnic group? So I think sometimes, and growing up, what we are taught is Manipuri is a language, at least in the same, and so although it's sometimes called Meiteilon, we would say don't speak in Manipuri, or let's speak in Manipuri, or do you know Manipuri? So Manipuri was not so much used as a marker of people, but rather as language. And so I think that when it comes to how people put terms or use like Liangmei Naga or Tangkul Naga or even Angami Naga, I think it is this kind of primacy of like subscribing to the larger Pan Naga identity. And we see this obviously even in Nagaland, not because not because they have this kind of like, so it is kind of like a solidarity of like a shared identity. It's like, in as much as someone in Nagaland would be Ao, and sometimes they would refer to themselves Ao Naga, or sometimes an Angami would say I'm Angami, but also I'm an Angami Naga when they speak to someone outside. And so I think that it's also a way of placing your tribe within a larger identity of a shared group, which is the Naga identity, and not so much about a geographical marker. But then I think that, like I said, there is something about, is it, should we use Manipuri Naga or Manipuri Tangkul, or is it, does it connote something like, with the moment we say Manipuri, much more than a geography, or what is it there? So I think that there's something that I am myself personally, I'm unable to wrap my head around. But I think this use of the second is mostly based on like a larger Pan identity that you've sort of placed that, okay, I'm a Liangmei, and this falls within the fall of a larger Naga identity. And again, I'm sorry if I know that I did not answer your question well, but thanks for this great questions.
No, thank you to you too. I think, for the first question, I think it makes sense because you start with two communities, first Zeliang, and then so it comes to Zeliangrong, the third edition community, right? So I think that sort of makes sense, but yeah, you can look further into it.
yeah, thank you, really, yeah.
That's all.
You're muted, Maisnam.
There's a comment. Okay, this is from Mello Katrim Shah. He's a member of our library. He says it was great presentation, Brother Roderick. Looking forward to reading more of your work. Thanks to ARC Library for bringing forth such colloquium. Yeah, I've shared many of Roderick's works with Mello, by the way. He does Southeast Asian studies. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else who has a question? Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Rustam, go ahead.
Hello, Roderick. Hello, Maisnam.
Hello.
Fine. We meet again.
So, yeah, we meet again. Thank you, Roderick. It's always been a pleasure listening to you talk. So, I just wanted to ask you about this. I just wanted to ask you about the role ethnic elites, they play in reformulating such identities. Now, for instance, in the case of Assam, at one point of time, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Oh, okay. So at one point of time, Kargis, Boros, all plain tribes in Assam, they were also considered to be part of the larger Assamese identity. But with the emergence of identity politics, these identities have become closed now. So I just wanted to ask, what kind of role elites play in reformulating such identities? Even for me, even though I'm a mission, I have no qualms, with identifying myself as an Assamese, I also continue to do so. But that itself is very contested, some missions might not do that. And some Boros and Kargis might also not do that. So I just wanted to ask you about it. Thank you, Con.
Thanks for those great questions. I think these are very pertinent questions, and again, not just in Assam but elsewhere too. Alpasa's work is very representative of this about the movement in Jharkhand, right? About especially her essay, "Who Cares for a New State?" On the ground, it just turns out that all of this big talks, tribal talks, so to speak, that performs sometimes or sometimes asserts to a certain degree of can be seen as something that's representative of the entire community, but often is not, and often is to the advantage of the elites. And as someone who has been researching on a resource-based economies, and as someone who's just touching base or just starting to explore other states as well, what you see is it's just kind of like the same old story about elite capture and elite project of configuring. Oftentimes, and I'm not saying always, but oftentimes, is very much contingent on who has the power and what do they want to do. So I think that sometimes the way, especially in a kind of places where liberal democracy or things where communities are more communitarian, and you try to tend to take a uniform view, there is every possibility of elites overshadowing the popular kind of imagination, and then that becomes representative of what the community is associated with. And I still see a lot of people who call themselves proudly Zelingron people, but but at a certain level, it was made very clear at one point of time to me that we've moved past that, but it's not, right? And so and this kind of, there is a lingering sentiment about I don't know why our leaders are so adamant on getting this or that, or why are we not doing this or that. So there is this various kind of and obviously there is something about common experience about, for example, one of the things that came up from my fieldwork is that, when you live in Manipur as this tribe versus that tribe, you see how this tribe is trying to dominate us all the time. And this is not an elite person saying that. This is an everyday, so to speak, ordinary person saying that, and saying these people try to overshadow us all the time. So there is something about the everyday experience of the people, but there also is, and there is something about elite project in all of this identity formation, and which cuts across resources, which cuts across bigger politics about how and what they can do out there. But again, I would not or I would not say that everything is elite project. I wouldn't do that. But surely there is a big chunk of elite kind of capture and elite kind of maneuvering that happens, and oftentimes it is not really representative and reflective of the community's members. Yeah.
Thank you, Roderick. I think you've answered it well.
Thanks for the question.
we got two generous comments from Paikomba and Batman. I don't know who Batman is. Paikomba says, nice presentation. I'll be visiting the library soon. Batman also says, great insight into the formation of different communities and politics behind the making of it. Kudos to the speaker, Mr. Roderick. Yeah.
Thanks to them. Yeah.
Anybody else who has a question
Hello,
or a
am I audible?
comment? Yes, go ahead. Amarjit, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Brother Arnapal, and thank you, Roderick, for
Amarjit,
your
could you just introduce yourself like just a one-line introduction? Yeah.
Okay.
Who are you and what do you do?
I'm trying to do PhD. Okay. So, Brother Roderick, listening to you talk was awesome. And I also read your essay. I saw a lot of similarities with Edmund Leach's The Political Systems of Highland Burma, particularly in the one essay that was shared. And, my question is, while we do understand the difference between ethnic boundaries and political boundaries, how should we as people of the land navigate through these so-called traditional or customary laws versus the state and government laws?
Yeah. Thanks, Amarjit, for the great question. That is also a really big and a very, very, very good, kind of like probe, and it leaves us to think a lot about, like, how do you navigate through this? And these are questions again, like as a group of younger scholars, as someone who is embarking on something that is, it's a huge scope out here, and I always say this, and I'm saying it here again. It's a very exciting time to do Northeast scholarship because we have such a prolific, emerging group of scholars doing so many different things. And this is how Maisnam has pointed out about queer theory. That's not my area of specialization, and I learned a lot from talking to him, about this thing. And it's like, we have people in history of science, we have people doing excellent work, and even, for instance, Malem's work, like I've learned a lot from these things, and in a very exciting way. So when you talk about, like, how do we navigate through this is something that is like too big a task to sort of say that, oh, this is how it is, and then this is how we should do it. But as someone who has researched this kind of like the sort of interface, or like this ethnic groups and its formation, and I think that one way is to sort of have more kind of like more inter-ethnic kind of group sort of events coming together, I guess, in ways that understands or brings in solidarity. And some of my fieldwork, what I've realized is, like, there are, and we think that in places like Manipur, it's this three big groups, like you have the Meitei, you have the Kuki, and you have the Nagas, and then you have the Meitei Pangals again. Like, it just gets so like all of these big things get clubbed together. But you come to Nagaland, and then everyone is Naga. Then what happens then? Is it a better place? Is it like is everyone like, okay, we're all Nagas? No, like tribes come in, villages comes in, and then you always have this kind of inter-tribe conflict, and say this tribe is over hard, and like this village is doing that, and you have boundary issues. So the boundary issue is not just between Assam and Nagaland, or Manipur and Nagaland, or like boundary issues are even with villages. Boundaries issues are with all of these kind of things. And so how to navigate this kind of the custom, the tradition, or like all of this kind of things vis-a-vis kind of the states, is to also sometimes, I think, like understand that just because you have the right to do it does not mean you are right. And so, like, that kind of a thing, like, so just because you have certain kind of things that is there for you, and you want to claim or like or you want to stake exclusive claims to it, sometimes, you know, it also, this is going to be a very difficult way to answer, but I'm going to try it. And I think that there's something about being being collaborative in trying to think about laws, because Northeast India is a place, and forget about Northeast India, even within Nagaland where I research, it is a legally very plural, like, you know, very plural kind of a place. So like when we say that there is something that's done, they will say, oh, this is not done in our custom. But one would think that that ends in a tribe, but within a tribe too, there are always issues that is not how you punish someone in our village. And they will say, no, but in our village that is done like this. And so there always is this kind of negotiation and tension. One would think that the Liangmais have a uniform customary law. It's not. It differs village to village. And then there is always this negotiation. And so this kind of tensions, or so to speak, frictions would not necessarily be state versus community, community versus community. It happens in very different kind of levels and scales. And the best to do is to really, and I really don't have this like how to move forward, but just to have to be kind of like mindful of like what could be like who is at the margin and what could be a just way to move forward. I would be very interested if you yourself take up this research and down the line give a talk about how to do this and how people are dealing with this. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm trying to do research in something related to this, but yes, like you said, it's a very vast area, and you know it's a very sensitive area to touch. So like I only wanted your honest opinion. I did not expect like an exact answer here. But anyways, thank you, brother.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you, Madhu, for the question, and Roderick too. Anybody else who has a question, comments? We have some time. It's yeah. Go ahead. This is Vion. Vion, just introduce like in the line. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Roderick. It's Vion here.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for your presentation. It was really interesting, and like nowadays, like tribal politics or identity politics is everywhere, and like thanks for working on this and coming out with this great essay. And thanks to Arnapal and ARCL also for always like hosting this very interesting event. So my question, it's a very broad question, because I'm not someone who's working or doing a research on this identity politics in the Northeast. So I wanted to know your, maybe because you have worked on it for some time, in the larger tribal and identity politics in the Northeast, what would be the fundamental standard, or let's say yardstick or axiom of being identified in a group, or in the term that you use in an event? So like whether it could be religion, or whether it could be language, or whether it could be some common origin theory. Because like we have like if we look at history, like we have observed a lot of times where religion and a certain new vernacular dialect became a unifying factor. Let's say the Nagamis in Nagaland, the Tulian dialect in Mizoram, the Lushai Hills, and even in the northern Manipur Naga Hills, the Hunfun dialect that became the common language. So like, and then Christianity. So apart from that, like if we take into account what today you spoke, then there's a lot of things going on other than just religion or language. So I just wanted to know, like, what would be the fundamental standard or yardstick of being identified in an event? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, as you already mentioned, that it's a very broad question. Thanks, Biwon, though, for this very, very interesting, insightful comments and question. And I think that by virtue of saying the question, all of us here are really getting good conversation. And I hope that it's not just my response, but and I'm pretty sure it is this exciting and very interesting comments and questions that's coming in that is really enriching this conversation. Again, I'm thankful for that. In terms of a larger standard yardstick, or so to speak, an axiom of how events come together, you're right in saying that it's not just religion, although religion often is and continues to be. And also, it is also not just language sometimes. Sometimes I think that there are what Anna Singh would call unlikely collaborations. So there are kind of very, for example, very recently I was in one particular place in Nagaland, and a tribe was celebrating their early harvest festival. And, in this festival, they invited another tribe to come and be part of this. And they were given a very special place and all of that. And they would really emphasize this historical, shared, not roots, but like shared history of living together. So here you see this kind of like a strong emphasis and like an articulation of relationship that is not based on religion, that is not based on tribe, but by sheer emphasis of being together in one place and living as as neighbors, and this kind of roots. And I was told that this particular village by this was invited in this particular festival every year, and sort of this becomes a tradition. And so then you have this new kind of formation of like these two villages coming together, like, so it's an event. So then if anything goes wrong, then you have this kind of a neighboring village who is coming to your rescue and things like that. So I think that there is something about situations that give rise to new standards and new yardsticks about how events happen and events come together. Sometimes for TP Suba, it's ethnic fission, and fusion happens because of what he calls the negative solidarity. So the negative solidarity is different from the Durkheimian organic or organic or mechanical solidarity, because organic solidarity just comes, through the shared roots, through this kind of like shared goals. But whereas mechanical is something that you don't think much about. But negative solidarity for Suba is about how you are brought together by situations of danger outside, and then that solidarity, evaporates once this danger outside is gone. And I think that this can be true in many situations, because like even when we talk about solidarity of the Northeast outside the Northeast, is very strong. But the moment you come to Northeast, you have this kind of state identities that's placed in, ethnic identities that's placed in. Within ethnic identity, there is clan identity again, at least in the Nagas. And within clan identity, you have this families and villages, and this village was notorious in that. So I think how you come together, I think that would be predominantly dependent on scales and situation. And so I think that, I guess one of the things that larger aim, in which all of you have mentioned it time and again, is to really say that, we should stop thinking about ethnic identities as something that is, although nobody's thinking, and I'm not responding to that, somebody say that and I'm responding to that, but I think that it's a reminder that, ethnic groups can be formed afresh, and then all of these events can come in the most unlikely place, can come in the most unlikely form. Nobody is threatening the Hamai people, but they're coming together and saying like, oh, we are Hamai people. So why is that so? Maybe Zilekron people came together because there was something that's going on, but Hamai people are coming together just because they are saying, oh, actually we have similar roots, so there's something. And then that scale can be very small, that people in Imphal, people in Kohima don't realize, why are these people like regrouping again? Like, what is happening? And which is why I'm also saying that, it's not just about the state, but also it could be, various other relationship with the neighbors, relationship with within, or like internal cohesions are get, because of leadership within, or because of certain vested interests of, as some have pointed out, the elites. And then some people trying to say that this elite is trying to capture, and this elite, and then sometimes that spills over in different ways. So I, for one, don't think that there is a larger standard axiom, other than thinking that these events can happen in any given time, in any given form, and driven by anything, both religion, language, state, relationship with the neighbors, and all of this together. But again, thanks for also letting me know that it is an open question, and I don't really have to give a good answer for that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. That's yeah, interesting. I think it's a never-ending I think thinking process. Yeah, I think a lot of people out here could also give answer to this. I think Tomo can also give, like, I don't know if there's time. If not, I think we can, I don't know, point it out. And
No,
Roderick,
yeah,
like
go
if
ahead,
you
go ahead, go
ever
ahead,
come this side,
go
yeah, as we have talked before, yeah, please
ahead.
let me know beforehand.
Oh yeah,
So
sure.
Roderick,
Yeah. Thank you. And I'd be
you
totally
are,
interested in know what others are thinking. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Roderick, you're on high demand. In fact, this was supposed to be in person, but since he's not in town, so we could not host him. But definitely in near future, you can definitely drop by and interact with people here. You know, Roderick, your unlikely formation in unlikely time, unlikely places, it's such an amazing, human bonds, kinship, solidarities, whatever we call it, can be formed in numerous ways and not always driven by this elite political agenda. And I want and things that I think I don't know if you mentioned it in the essay or maybe I kind of skipped, but things that you brought up again and again, elite political agenda and elite capture, right? It's such an interesting, I think, observation, given the kind of crisis that we're going through right now. And this unlikely formation of solidarity reminds me of a Manipuri proverb, which I won't translate in English right now, but it says something like liminality hui hodong to nuctionary. I think those of you who understand Michael can understand. Liminality hui hodong to nuctionary. Because cats and dogs are supposed to be always like at loggerheads and fighting.
Correct.
But
Correct.
but if dogs and cats stay under the same roof, it also happens that they become friends. They started living together and taking care of each other, protecting, defending, whatever. So cats and dogs may not always be enemies, but they could also be friends if they live under the same care and roof and all. So I think that those cases I think the fact that death proverb exists very well is that our ancestors knew that, there are differences always, but despite the differences, we can always find commonalities or shared effects and then bring us together. So that's a very interesting observation. But yeah, I would now turn it over to our audience if we have any questions. I think we can.
Yeah.
Roderick, how much time do you have? Do you have any? When do you have to leave?
Yeah, I think I can stay on for one or two more questions, and yeah, I think I'm
Sure.
good with one or two more.
Sure.
Yeah, can I? Yeah, just.
Hello.
Oh,
Yeah.
We have two people.
Can I go on
go
first?
ahead.
Sure. Priyanka, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you could just introduce like in a line, yeah, and then.
So, yeah, I'm Priyanka Devi Catherine, who are so I studies kind of indulge in ethnic Manipur. Basically, I do a study on Naga, Meitei, and Kuki, but there are certain contentious ideas about how Naga and Kuki has been, it's a British term and everything. So I won't go into that kind of things, but to just understand it is as a ethnic group. So my question is, you have talked about many of the ethnic formation and ethnic affiliation of mixed. So if like commenters were asking about questions on how this formation are being done through events that are socially constructed through religion or like other particles like external factors like elites. I think in doing ethnic studies, we basically study all those formation or categorization in three particular school of thoughts. I think you must have done on it, like the primordialist, the and the instrumentalism. So my studies also relates to that because I study on those areas or those school of thoughts. While doing studies in ethnic communities in Manipur, like I do on organizational studies, even the organizational studies reflect certain, primordial aspect of how those groups are being connected in that organization or in that group affiliation or group formation. So my question is, talking about this primordial from primordial aspect, or the what basically the have identified as the given notion of understanding ethnicity. So like you have talked about many aspects of religion as well as been how socially constructed ideas being used in the formation of ethnicity as well. My question is whether all this, like notion of categorizing certain formation of ethnicity in the school of thought being applicable in the kind of construction, in the kind of, formation of ethnic groups in Manipur. This is general query also. This I have been indulging for some times, which I'm not able to give an input to. So if you have any, understanding on it, please kindly share. Thank you.
Thanks, Priyanka, for your comments and questions, and that's a very heavy kind of like instigative or like insightful, so to speak, nudging to think about like how does it fit on the larger existing school of thought and scholarship that is there. I think that ethnicity, so to speak, had been like scholars, at least anthropologists, for the longest time, scholars who study ethnicity. In the mid 20th century, they were tired of studying, and some people say there's nothing that gonna come out of this, identity formation, and like it's just if everything is social construct, then what is the use of studying? Like well, this is social construct, that is social construct, gender is social construct, everything is social construct. And what's the point? Like everything moves, everything changes. But I think there is value in sort of like, I think it's agreed upon that like there's a very kind of move that all of how this kind of operationalization of whether some people believe it to be a social construct or some people believe it to be actually primordial values or whichever you would call it. And to date, some people still dismiss certain knowledge as something that is invented. Some people would see the same knowledge or ideas as something that is true and factual. And so these are some things that we cannot impose on one another. And I don't think that we should also. But as scholars who study ethnicity, I think the fresh interest regarnered in the 1990s, primarily by looking at how ethnic identities have become implicated in kind of different ways. Like Al-Pasha, as we talked about, is one. But even, for instance, how, for example, John Comaroffs, who were based in Harvard and were, until very recently under much controversy, and rightly so, for their sexual misconduct. But one thing that they did, and which opened up the gate of how ethnic or ethnicity gained fresh interest, is how people commodify ethnicity and how ethnicity or tribes itself becomes, an enterprise through which to further their sort of economic interests, but in the case of what has been the scholarship in the region is political interest. And so it is these things that I would think, like, that as scholars, we're not necessarily thinking about like whether it's primordial or whether it's constructed, and if everything is constructed, but I think that our scholarly interest, or at least mine, would be how does this construction happen and when and why? And that can be very instrumental in the way we think about, and not really concerned about this bigger school of thought, so to speak, about whether I'm in this gang or that gang, but rather to be more open to sort of incorporate and understand and say, like, how is ethnic identities taking new shape? Or how does it interface with capitalism, for instance, a big word? Or how is it interfacing with, new changes in, a group's religious, predicament? Or so all of this together, I think our scholarly work would be beneficial for, a larger context. The moment we try to sort of located in this larger, newer processes, larger kind of like waves of things that's coming. And in the 1990s, there was this big move for for many parts of the world to really push towards what we call indigeneity or indigenous, and so then question becomes like, then who is indigenous, who is not indigenous, how is indigeneity defined? And till now there is no consensus. And Cooper wrote this very interesting essay about like, so can everyone become indigenous? Like, is this because being in one place? What about the people who are marginalized and are not in one place? So like there are multiple questions that comes up. And I think that even when we study ethnicity, is to really think about the fresh ways in which our area of study, or our region or population of study, sort of invoke and bring up and reflame it, like, and that would be for me, even in the case of your research context, would be to understand how is this ethnic groups or group which you ever study making use of or not making use of, or like tying up with existing kind of situation and conflicts. And that would be very instrumental to understanding, like, okay, this kind of situation, at least we know that in this context that happens, and so it can be generated that way. And again, I'm sorry if I did not respond. I could not quite follow the first part of your comments, but thanks nevertheless, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like, it's kind of puzzling in this ethnic study, I think, but I would love to read your article, so please share it in the library group. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Panthuran has a question. Panthuran?
Yeah. Hi, Roderick. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I just wanted to follow through in the sense that I was like reading about this and, your article. And then, for example, I noticed this case of, Tenimia People's Organization and versus Jalangrong body, about the land conflict, adjudication regarding Koziri, I guess, Quezolsa, these areas. And interestingly, I was looking at a press note, and one of the press note that was released by Jalangrong Baudi, which was a conglomerate of this Assam section, Manipur section, and Nagaland section. So they were talking about, let's say, the kind of clarifying that the Nagaland Zeliang People's Organizations shouldn't sort of interfere in the matter, because they are not, they shouldn't interfere in the matter regarding this Manipur issue, kind of, this thing. And they were justifying the sense that this Nagaland Zeliang People's Organization, they are not a constituent part of Tenimia People's Organization. Okay. So, while as opposed to it, Jelangong Baudi is part of this as a constituent body of TPO. So I was like looking at this thing, and then this, as you mentioned, the fluidity of territories, and not only the international boundaries, we're talking about national boundaries, and then here we are talking about the federal state boundaries, So this breakdown of this fluidity of boundaries, and let's say intercutting of, let's say, for example, I belong to this formation, this federal state formation for now, in this context, in this land conflict. While, as you said, in other contexts, it might be that there will be a cross-cutting sort of a solidarity. Okay. So that is there. I was like thinking about it. And then another issue that, for example, let's say in the armed conflict angle also, when we look at the case of the sort of rivalry which is going on and off between, let's say, NSC and IM and the Jalangrong United Front, there itself again, not more of about the intertribal thing, but again, let's say, for example, some people say that ZUF is backed by, the opposing faction, which is NSNK. And, this kind of things just come up, and then, the tribal categories do not function very smoothly as such. So I don't know, this is also kind of interesting for me. And regarding, I guess, the politics of recognition, as following Arnie's thing, I would like to supplement that when we talk about politics of recognition, it's just not about, let's say, state recognition as such. Like, for example, Charles Taylor has written about this thing, following through Rousseau, that we talk about recognition on the basis that it has to be mutually reciprocal. Okay, then there has to be an equal discourse and things like that, right? And there has to be some sort of a, let's say, unity of purpose and things like that. And that is where I think the discourse in the larger canvas of the Northeast identity politics or assertive politics, that's where we're lagging behind, I guess. I mean, okay, so we can academically, we can resume at that kind of a angle of approach. And also that has very serious political consequences, which we are seeing the Manipur conflict right now between the Métis and the Kukis. So identity politics and the language of identity politics, it has to transcend somewhere, without going into the, let's say, the reductionist view of identity, I guess, right? So I guess we have a lot of work to do. So I don't know, I'm just throwing up some points.
Right.
Thanks very much for those very insightful comments. And yeah, I agree with you with all of it. I mean, TPO and Zelengrong body case that happened very recently, that's a perfect example of it. Like, we thought we were one, but then you have again, like suddenly, within TPO, you have other groups and, the Zelengrong body saying that all of that. And within Zelengrong, you have, the Manipur or Assam group, and then like versus existing Zeliang versus Zeliang Rong. So like, which you have rightly said, it's like, it just shows that this coming together of an event. There's no such thing as Zeliang Rong anymore then, right? So there's a Zeliang versus Zeliang Rong. So it's this two groups making an event, and then like, have this kind of very fluid solidarity. And the same thing with ZUF and NNCN. There are so many things that people have said about how ZUF is this, ZUF is that, and this, and even like what John Thomas has written also is about this parallel movement that was happening even with this thing, the Zelengrong movement and the Naga national movement, and all of this over time, how it converges. But there are also scholars who say that it is not antithetical to one another, because in the larger scheme of things, the Zelengrong movement is within the the Naga movement, just as the frontier Nagaland would, for some people, be a threat to the Naga movement, but some people say it is not necessarily, because it is just a bifurcation of an existing thing. But the larger goal of certain kind of negotiation about political autonomy or relationship with the Indian state continues to exist. So there are different kind of interpretations to it, but what we can say for sure is this: there is this kind of like fissures and fusions of groups coming together, and which becomes an event. And you're right also about all of this politics of recognition and assertions have far-reaching, sometimes violent consequences. And I think that as scholars, we don't sometimes think enough, or perhaps sometimes we do and intentionally do. I think that sometimes in research, one of my shortest research ethic, that line that I would always say is, well, I'm here to research, and my research kind of IRB clearance and all of this philosophy and ethic relies on one thing, which is do no harm. And do no harm to who, or like, in what ways? So maybe sometimes, this question becomes, I think, too paperworky, and becomes like such a logistical questions about, oh, I just have to get past this IRB and do it. But sometimes I think we should also think about this idea about like, is our scholarship moving towards a larger, societal justice, or are we just creating more, enmity, or creating more problems? Because at the end of the day, the least we can do as scholars is really think about, like, obviously there is something about getting to know. Humans are curious beings, and it's always nice to read beautiful lines, but at the same time, I think like we have so much responsibility, and because of what you exactly said, is like scholarships have consequences, and bad scholarship can sometimes have really bad consequences. And so if you would excuse me, Maisnam, would like to end my note here by saying that I think it's a call for all of us to really like not just think about do no harm in terms of our research fieldwork ethic, but even in terms of a larger scholarly endeavor, like to say that let's at least think about doing no harm to anyone and work towards a larger social justice in ways that we can, in the spaces that we can. But from my end, thank you so much. This has been a very enriching conversation, and thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Roderick.
Thank you.
Before you leave, we are going to take a picture because last time we forgot to do one. So, I don't know how to take. I request some of our audience, if not all, to turn on their video, the camera, so that we could see it. So that it's just not the two of us who are there on screen and a few display pictures. If may I request some of you? Yeah, hi Malengambi. I knew you would do that. Paikomba is here. Paikomba teaches in Mao College. I was just talking about Paikomba the other day to Roderick. All right, so we have a lot of people. Resha, hi everyone. Vion is here. So, is it? I think control. Sorry, shift command. Let me try. Okay.
I will do it. Okay, I know it.
Sorry.
I know I will do.
I
I
didn't
will
get
take the
your.
screenshot. Okay.
Okay, well, please do that. Please
Yeah,
do that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so that I can
I
pose
have
properly.
been doing since the beginning of the session.
All right. Oh, screenshot. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing
I
that.
will
I'll
send
ask
you
you
later.
later. Yeah. So can we take one right now?
Yeah. It's okay.
Done?
Done.
All right. Thank you so much. We're going to
Excellent.
share this
All
picture on
are
Instagram.
beautiful
Thank you,
and handsome.
Roderick, for taking out time
Thanks,
for the amazing
everyone.
presentation and that brilliant question and answer session. Thank you so much, and see you all soon.
Thank you. See you all in person sometime. Bye.
Yeah, someday. Bye, folks, everyone. Record.